Welcome to Impact Quantum, the podcast for the quantum curious. In this episode, we dive headfirst into the high-stakes world of post-quantum cryptography. Because, let's be honest, no one wants their secrets cracked open like a dollar store padlock. Frank Vigne and Candace Gillhoolley sit down with Andy and Ryan from Quantum Night, who are on a mission to future-proof our digital world before quantum computers turn to days. Encryption into ancient history. From harvest now, decrypt later threats to the real risks of AI-powered cyberattacks. We explore why upgrading security isn't just an option, it's a necessity. Can we stay ahead of the quantum curve? And what does all this mean for your data, privacy, and even national security? Stick around to find out. This episode does get a little into encryption technologies and is rated 3 Schrödingers. Now, here is the dubstep.
Hello and welcome back to Impact Quantum, the podcast for the quantum curious. How's it going, Candace?
It's great. Thank you for asking. Would you believe it is snowing on March 4th here in Montreal, Quebec?
Wow. Well, it does get cold up there, that's for sure. And it stays cold.
It stays cold, exactly. It's just a light little dusting on top of the 6 feet of snow that's already on my front lawn. It's great.
Wow.
It's
I
great.
hope you have a snowblower.
Yes.
I shudder to think that with that shoveling how much snow would do to my back in its present condition. But
right. But you'd be trained by the end of the season, man. Like, you might be rough at the beginning, but by the end, after about 5 months, you're golden. So, absolutely.
Awesome. So we've been dancing around the topic of quantum cryptography, post-quantum cryptography, and kind of how that works quite a bit. We've kind of mentioned it, and then we kind of talk about how that has the potential to upend a lot of things. So we have Andy and Ryan, not to be confused with Andy Leonard, on the show here to talk from Quantum Night to talk to us about what a post-quantum world looks like and answer some burning questions you and I may have about post-quantum cryptography. Welcome to the show, Andy and Ryan.
Thank you, Frank. It's great to be on the show and be meeting you guys.
Hey, no problem. So first off, I think most of us know that quantum computation has the potential to ruin RSA encryption, which is the backbone of everything we use today. But you have an answer to that. So it's basically falls into the world of post-quantum cryptography. Can you explain a little bit what post-quantum cryptography is, just for the layman and just the quantum curious?
Yeah, just to lay it out there. So what post-quantum cryptography really is updating cryptography to withstand quantum computing power, right? And so the challenges you mentioned is, as the advent of quantum computing is already amongst us and is rapidly progressing, as we know, really the underlying algorithms that are what RSA and AES encryption, so it's both symmetric and asymmetric types of encryption, that underlying algorithm is at risk. And meaning that quantum machines will be able to crack those algorithms very quickly. So, like today and over the last 30 years up to now, without quantum computers, right, really those algorithms and the strength of that math was good enough where really the strongest computers on the planet, even high performance distributed machines, really wouldn't be able to crack those underlying algorithms over the next 70 years or maybe even forever, right? And so, but the challenge is now with quantum coming on and quantum coming on rapidly, as you know, it could crunch a lot more data a lot faster. So cracking and breaking down a much more complex and much longer set of integers is something that definitely quantum computing can achieve. And it's already been, it's a fact that it's vulnerable right now. And really, if you think about it, it's really the weaponization of it that we should all be worried about, right? It's really about how, potentially adversaries or other bad actors are getting their hands on some of these compute capabilities now, and then really wreaking havoc on a lot of things, right? Because the big challenge right now is the harvest thing, right? We know that our networks have been breached, right? The cybersecurity industry the last 10 years has been focused just on network monitoring and kind of, identifying when things happen and trying to react to that and quarantine and lock down as quickly as possible in reaction to that, right? Well, what we're saying, and with our technology, is it really buttons you up for quantum and future protection, but it also cures a lot of the challenges and the gaps in the current cryptographic structure that exists underlining everything today. And that's everything from the government to us individually, to even how this call or our meeting right now, the audio and video feeds even being fed through, right? And so man-in-the-middle attacks are common, and that's kind of where we're at. And really, if anybody intercepts any of this data in the middle, right, some of our adversaries, for example, they've been parking it in large databases and just waiting for the day that their quantum algorithm, that they can crack out the quantum algorithm challenge, right? And they're really close. And in fact, some people would say, I don't have high enough clearance to know for sure. I can't validate.
And but, even if you did,
even if I did, some have even said that we've already cracked. It's already past that point, right? And actually, some, like our government, for example, they're claiming it's had that capability for several years, right? And it's just a matter now of time before everybody else has it. As we know, that's the natural progression of attacks and sort of technology weaknesses. If there's one weakness, maybe one person knows about it now, but we know that's just going to proliferate pretty soon where it's Gen Pop, right? And that's kind of that's where we're at right now. Really, quantum machines in general have been democratized, right? And with all the various companies out there trying to really grow rapidly, we're seeing the progress of that. And I think the new chips from Google and the things you guys addressed on the last podcast also address, kind of the rapidness of how this is coming together. And we see that accelerating even further. I mean, the value of quantum machines is going to change the game. And we're right there.
Right. So for those that are not quantum nerds, and I wouldn't call myself a quantum nerd, but I may have played one on TV, and I did stay at a Holiday Inn last night. You've dropped a couple of terms that may be unfamiliar with some folks. So one is symmetric and asymmetric. So you want to give me like an elevator pitch on the difference between the two?
Yeah, basically the way that it works, symmetric and asymmetric works a very simple way. It's a matter of where the keys are and where the keys are controlled. So in an asymmetric model, this is like your RSA encryption. This is what we use on the internet all day. You have your login and password, your username, and it involves a whole infrastructure in the middle called PKI, which is public key infrastructure. And basically the key that is your key for your stuff is shared across the whole spectrum and every partner that's in the middle there. Right. So like, just think of this call right now, right? If you think about all the people that are sharing our key along this hop, we each have Microsoft probably on our machine, or Apple, right? For the OS. And then you have a Wi-Fi router, and you have antivirus software, and you're hopping through probably multiple cloud services that Zoom's using in different regions. And then on the back end to each of us, it's mirroring some similar path to get back to getting back down to each of you individually, right? Well, in the middle there, right, all those keys are passed along. That's asymmetric cryptography, basically that shared key. And the challenge with that, I mean, just like with anything, is in the current key structure, is if someone gets those keys, they have access to your kingdom, right? And in the current world, in the way cryptography works, even especially symmetric, but asymmetric also, is you're only allowed to protect certain elements of data at a certain level. Right? You can never get down into like database level encryption down to the varchar within a column and row, for example, right? And that includes not only encrypting it down to that level, but also controlling access, like admin access and other things. Because as we know, as much as we know, with quantum machines breaking the underlying algorithms, quantum machines can also be used to ramp up AI to make things like social engineering attacks and everything more precise and much more powerful also, right? And so you can't just think of just the underlying algorithm as being the solve all cure all. That's one piece of it, right? But then, it's the other pieces on top of it. Like, how usable is it? Can it be applied to places like an IoT sensor all the way out at the edge, and still be performant enough where you can actually leave it on and use it in an operational fashion moving forward? Because our critical infrastructure and a lot of those things today turn a lot of that off because of the inefficiencies in that structure. Right? Or they have hard-coded passwords sometimes, literally the word password a lot of the times, that's hard-coded into some really mission-critical things, right? And the reason why is sharing those keys is very difficult. And so on a physical, a nuclear facility or whatever, they're not going to connect that to an online anywhere that anybody can get to it, right? And so that's how they combat that, is they approach it that way. Now, symmetric cryptography, instead of sharing a public key, you each endpoint to endpoint, the endpoints basically have the key. I'm trying to visualize this in the best way so people can see that. So instead of passing the key in between anywhere, the owner and the creator of that has the key, and the recipient has the key, and you can very much sort of cut out everybody in the middle, right? Ideally, cut everybody out. But with quantum computing, as we just said, those keys only being at a length, really the strength of that encryption being cracked, even that symmetric key being visible or being cracked in that realm becomes possible too, right?
So it's fair to say that, with something that looks like a sturdy padlock today will become one of those dollar store things you put on your luggage in the future, right? Like it's still, the lock is still there, but it doesn't take it just takes paper clip and a little bit of patience to crack it open.
Yep. I remember those little plastic locks they put on like the diaries or whatever, like that's basically what a block looks like now. And right now you hand your keys to the kingdom to Apple and Google and everybody sort of in the middle that is stewarding the privacy of your data today.
And you have to trust them, obviously. And it's interesting how removed we are from that. Like it's not quite as hands-on as it is now. Everyone talks about, there's been a recent story about Apple dropping end-to-end encryption in the UK for reasons. But I didn't really realize like there's a whole infrastructure that's hidden from me, and I have to I have to do the trust me, bro, to know that my signal messages are encrypted, end to end. I don't know, like I have mixed feelings about that. So the other thing you mentioned, which I think is important to double click on, is the notion that bad actors or questionable actors and everyone in between are, what they're doing now is they're basically hoovering up or hoarding all the data they can now, in the hopes that when a quantum computer exists, assuming it doesn't already, they'll be able to just crack today's secrets later on. So even if they do upgrade to some kind of post-quantum or quantum-resistant algorithms, that they'll be able to read, your credit card number today, your secret messages and all that. And that goes from the individual level all the way up to nation states. You're nodding in agreement for those who can't see, so that means yes. Which I think is very scary because storage is cheap, relatively, and I mean the impact that this could have is very negative in terms of national security, nuclear codes, little things like that. And more to the point, what's the solution here, right? I've heard post-quantum computing encryption. I've heard quantum-resistant encryption. What's the difference between the two? And I remember when I was reading this, and I felt really smart because they were talking about some kind of elliptical curve encryption. So let's break it down. One, what's the difference between post-quantum and quantum-resistant?
Well, that's a good question. So I'm not sure of the exact nuance of exactly what they're saying, but the way that I see it's like this. So NIST, for example, just released their post-quantum cryptographic standards, right? And so most of it's RSA, some of it's AES, so both symmetric and asymmetric capabilities within that, right? And so the first wave of sort of quantum validated algorithms, right, are the ones that made it through that process, right? So those are the ones that they bless. They say, hey, if you implement these, this is what our standard is. You have to be a minimum of this in order to be compliant, right? And they're just putting that out now, and they're starting to roll mandates out to people, right? But you also have a whole crew of people that aren't NIST validated that claim that they're doing some interesting things, as we'll say, creative math. And I'd say elliptic curve falls within the creative math category. And that's the challenge, right? I think that what people don't realize is when you move away from real math and physics, actual math and physics that has a foundation, and you start to create your own subset, as soon as people realize the angle and the tact you took to create your own version, it's really easily cracked. And that's what they found with a lot of those challenges is, as secure as they thought they were with their creativity, it really failed because they got away from standard math and physics and really the things that you can use and trust to make sure it's ready to go.
Okay.
And I'd say that, and a lot of people are talking the game to get NIST certified, FIPS validated. There's two different things. You have the algorithms themselves, right? That's what's posted on NIST. And then you have what we call, which is the cryptographic validation module program, CVMP through NIST, right? And what that does is it basically validates that you have a application or some sort of a system that is compliant with that, and that can be deployed. And so that's what we actually have. We have our FIPS 140-2 and FIPS 140-3 certificate, validation certificate from NIST in that realm. And so what that means is that they've tested it and they know that we can run the algorithms that they need to support FIPS 143 across our solution.
Okay. So maybe I remember reading, because I kind of fell out of that space because it was fascinating, but life kind of got in the way and it wasn't related to my day job. That's probably why you don't hear a lot about elliptical curves anymore, because I remember there was a series of initial candidates NIST had selected for testing, and a bunch of them failed. And one thing I remember, I highly recommend this book. It's the Bruce Schneier book, Applied Cryptography. Yep. It's kind of like, I forget what color it is now. It's either red or blue. Excellent book. It's about yay thick, but it'll answer it'll make you question a lot of things too. But one of the particularly fascinating anecdotes in the book, and there's plenty, because Bruce Schneier is an amazing writer as well as a cryptographer, is, basically there's a lot of clever people who develop these cryptographic algorithms who are not as clever as they think they are. And he says it way better than I will, but there are plenty of shipwrecks of good ideas that just that were able to be vulnerable and found that. And it seems like quantum resistant or post-quantum cryptography is very very much also falls to that role. And I guess the difference between the two, I hear post-quantum now more than quantum resistant, because I think the machines are less theoretical now, right? You can probably test them a little more rigorously than you could before. So the term I tend to hear more now is post-quantum cryptography, right? Is basically making sure you're able to. But it does bring up an interesting point. How do you know it's really quantum secure if there's no air quotes real quantum machine now? And I think it's important to point out that Shor's algorithm, which is the one we figured out, which is not we, but like Peter Shor figured out, would break our traditional infrastructure, was developed in the 90s. I want to say 1992 or 94. So how do these theoreticians, mathematicians work this out for machines that don't quite exist yet?
Well, I think today what people need to do is looking at, because obviously we're still on the progress of quantum machines coming directly themselves. But what they can do is they can run it across their own systems, and they can pound it with different capabilities. Like they can run up a cluster of D-Wave quantum machines and try to see what they can do, right? But end of the day, they need to button up what's there currently, right? And you have to draw a line in the sand on this stuff pretty quickly, because as you just mentioned, on the harvest now, decrypt later sort of mindset that's going on that we know is happening, that means they already have the data and they're getting it every day. And they're doing it in ways from the chip that's around all the cybersecurity stuff, and it's been baked in for a long time. And you can imagine, I mean, I haven't seen the data centers they have, but I imagine they have to be, might probably be able to see them from Google if you look down, because they have to probably be pretty massive by this point. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge, right? Is they're going to be going on there. In the US, I think that where people need to focus on is that line in the sand where they upgrade enough, right? And that's the challenge, I think, where even NIST, coming out with the 512 standard initially, right? That obviously is much more in the AES or symmetric side than 256, right?
And to be clear, you're talking about 256-bit encryption, which is going to be the width of the key. And now you're basically doubling it to 500 or more than double. Well, you're doubling it. But the computational space is an exponential. Is that a fair way to say it?
That is definitely a fair way to say it. And if you think about key length, the overall strength of your key is based on how many characters and the randomness of each of those characters, right? And so that's where things like RNG and all those things come into play. They're attacking that specific piece of it, trying to deal with the random number aspect. But really, at the end of the day, as I mentioned, NIST is at 512. Whereas we're bringing something to the table that starts at 512, it actually goes up to 10,240 bit out of the box. So it's beyond exponentially stronger than anything else available on the planet. And we feel, based on the use cases of what you want to do, you would want to apply different levels of cryptographic protection. Maybe if you have a long-term archival scenario, that's where you want to have your 10,240 bit, because who knows where the technology will be 50 years from now. If you want to have it be just a streaming communication that's just real time right now and it's not super sensitive, maybe 512 is totally fine, right? Because it's a little bit more performant. The key thing there is, as you look at bumping up bit size, and this has been the challenge with AES and RSA, is the performance degrades very, very rapidly. And so you can't realistically deploy it into the use cases we have because we don't have enough network bandwidth and compute power to handle it. And so that's why, up to now, even before the post-quantum stuff, people have tuned down and turned off and not used cryptography where they probably should, as well as, like I mentioned, all the way down to like the database level, like a character within the database. You can't do that today because of those performance issues, right? And so what we're doing is changing that narrative, where not only is our stuff exponentially stronger, but it's really about ultra performant as well. So we can be deployed, for example, in an IoT sensor out at the edge. We could be deployed in the RFID chip in your credit card. We could be deployed in, obviously, drones, satellite, anywhere that's running a compute at all and has Linux capability. We can be deployed on. Imagine it's this little tiny power pellet, and that's the game. It's exponentially stronger, but it's that performance gain now that allows you to apply it and really apply it at scale across many places that were previously not possible.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting. And sorry, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, Candace, because like I see, but what you have a really cool looking website, right? It's Quantum Night with a K.AIO, and you emphasize the performant part. Like, how is that your main differentiator from existing solutions?
Well, actually, so those are two important factors of our solution, but I wouldn't say that that's unique. We anticipate people will at some point be able to be getting stronger key links and some performance. But actually, our secret sauce, I mean, those are both very important. We're the only ones that bring that to the table today, so let's be clear. But the secret sauce in our patented technology is actually within the key material itself, and we call it a hyperkey. And what it does is it extends the space of the key material where you can embed other things right within the key material itself. So that's things like access control lists, or maybe a machine ID, or some biometric data, or other factor now that ties it very specific. And I guess, that data provenance or guaranteed authenticity is the objective with that. And so as we mentioned in the man in the middle stuff, especially with AI and training AI models, poison data is a huge problem. Right. Slight variance in data capture and AI throws the results off dramatically, making your AI models basically worthless very quickly. And so if you don't have control of all the data that's coming in, imagine, you're our DoD and you have weather data, and that's controlling the missions that you're setting up all over globally, right? If someone's poisoning the weather data, your planning's screwed. I mean, it's done, right? And so to put your arms around guaranteeing that the data coming in is accurate is the same thing as a social engineering attack of making sure that this person who's supposed to be admin accessing this is actually that person, right? It's the same. And so our hyperkey addresses that piece of it directly as well. And so it's the, really compliance, but then the strength, the efficiency, but then that guaranteed authenticity, that's the game changer. And that's the reason I'd say why have been speaking, without really being, besides just being a handful of guys that launched this out of our garage 2 years ago, joking, of course, but, that why we're at the level we are and speaking with the people we are and why we're NIST validated. And we actually already have a ATO that's provisional from the FDA. We've been issued a provisional ATO, and we expect that to be approved fully any day. And what that will make us is we will be the only crypto system that's validated for use in life critical systems in the US.
Interesting. So for those that don't, I live in the DC area. So FIPS, I know the IT Fed speak, but ATO is authorization to operate. Is that?
That's correct.
Just wanted to have people outside the Beltway that are like, what is he saying? He's making these letters up. No, that's a big deal, because you're basically you're trusted to run on these particular sensitive networks.
Well, imagine in health, right? If you're going into surgery, do you want the robot guy that's doing stuff on there to be able to get hacked and have someone from outside your surgeon be able to control that thing? Probably not. I'd say that's probably a bad place to be, right? Or a heart monitor or anything that could be manipulated. And actually, there's a lot of not really public talk about those types of hacks and those breaches that have occurred, but they've been significant, and you'd be surprised. I mean, it's caused, hundreds of thousands of deaths straight up over that. And they don't really talk about it, right? But these are all real things that are occurring. And let's be clear here also, like, this is the biggest tragedy, right? Is the people that own and control and are, their job is to worry about the security of these things. They're really caught with their pants down right now. And because there's not capabilities that are within their control that allow them to push the bar to protect themselves any different than what's happening today, right? And so that's what we're bringing to the table, is that ability for people to really, in an immediate fashion, deploy something, put that line in the sand, and know you're protected from at least this point moving forward, instead of just sort of being wide open and just waiting for the day that the big attack does come and you're going to not be able to do anything about it. And there's lots of attacks. I mean,
well, even without quantum computers, the attack surface is very large anyway, and we've seen a number of hospital systems, county governments, a couple of cases, state governments get ransomware attacks, right? And that's, again, those are the attacks about. There might be more subtle things. I remember I had a little glucose monitor, one of those things you stick on there, and I was telling somebody who's an acquaintance of my wife, it's like, yeah, we don't allow certain people in our organization to have those. So I'm like, why? I'm like, well, it's not so much that the numbers can be hacked, although they can be apparently, but it's more that makes you a unique identifier that you can track a person through airports, through public places with just that, with that thing. And, as he reminded me that the S in IoT stands for security. Right? These things are not built with security in mind. And I suspect that that has a lot to do with why there are so many deaths related to this, right? I look at the heart monitors, anytime I'm in a hospital, or, the nurse leaves. Pacemakers, right? Like, and I'm sure
and you can be identified by your pacemaker, I mean, yeah.
And if somebody is a high value target, that could be that opens the door for a lot of nefarious things. Which is very scary. Like, you read some of this stuff and it's like, wait a minute, is this a thriller movie or is this real? And more often than not, it's more real than I want to believe it is.
I mean, that's why I think we got back into the game. Me and my colleagues, we have some deep cryptographic experience with
Right.
So, we can talk about that once people sign an NDA, but we're happy to share. But I think that I guess just where we're at in that realm, as people try to button up what they're trying to do, it's kind of the Wild West and trying to think about how to do this. And I think there's a lot of consortiums out there that create confusion around it. I think it slows down sort of the progress in there. I think you have as I mentioned, me and my colleagues, we have that experience, but we also could have retired 3 years ago instead of starting this company. But we have kids, right? I have kids, and I mean, my kids are about both your kids' age, of a senior in high school and a freshman in high school. But I mean, I'm seeing firsthand kind of the impact on them, and they live in the surveillance state. We didn't grow up in that. It's an awful place to be. Like, I don't want that to be the norm. I'm an artist also, so I'm a musician, right? And I believe in protecting your creative IP and those types of things too. I think today it's the Wild West. You can't. I think that like, our technology pushes the bar where now you can, right? And then, in my opinion, our big motivation is making sure, because right now we're at the transition period, like, like the big evolutions in technology, right? With quantum, it's changing the whole paradigm again, right? Kind of like the semiconductor did back in the 60s and that time frame. We're in this evolution point where if we don't get this right, the world and our life as we know it is going to change, right? The ability to once again know and guarantee that this is you that we're talking to, and it's not an AI bot, right? I mean, there's been plenty of things where even without quantum computing, those things are already advanced enough where it's tricking a lot of people, including boards and board meetings, and allocating lots of money to different places without even realizing that it's not even the CEO talking to you, right? These things have already started to occur, and quantum is just going to accelerate that. And so because of this change, it's making people rethink this finally, which it should have been thought about a long time before. It's just very, very complicated art to be participating in. There's not many people that have a PhD in physics and math and work for the NSA for 20 years in cryptography that can talk intelligently on this stuff. And that's why you see not much progress with it, with, you know, even from the big guys like IBM and Intel and you name it, Microsoft. You know, they're kind of in the lane. They've tried lots of different things for streaming and trying to do little things, but nothing's changed the overall underlining sort of, we'll call it the architecture or flow of how it works today. And, you know, quantum cryptography addresses, you know, that underlining algorithm, right? But a post-quantum crypto system not only addresses the algorithms, it addresses all those other gaps there that are around those authenticity handshakes and the other things that are inherent in every transaction that we deal with on the internet, or, you know, anything digitally today. It's just,
I'm just impressed of how we've made that invisible.
Yep.
And I think that invisibility came at a cost of, we don't have an appreciation for it. And how do you talk to the hippo or highest paid person's opinion? Like, how do you, or the corner office person, like, how do you convince them that this is very real?
Okay.
I think there's a big thing that's happening now too with these large data breaches where they're actually being fined, and that C-suite level of employee is actually feeling it, and some of those guys are getting canned and having to actually pay those fines, and they're being held accountable where previously that wasn't the case. You know, so between that and then they're talking about for a while getting rid of the ransomware insurance, so that not being paid out. So there's some things that are happening and are at least being discussed that are bringing that thought and that thought process to that level of corner office.
That's a good point. And I think it always boils down to, is it people, technology, and process? Right? The technology is actually the easy part. It's the people and the process. And how do you get the people to work with the process to use the technology? And I mean, this is true in a lot of things, not even, but this is the one where that if you're in the right industry or the wrong industry, I mean, it's life and death.
Yep. And if you think about where schooling and, you know, really the education over the last 30 years hasn't really offered cryptography, right? There's some specialty programs, places, you know, there's a very slim amount of people graduating every year in the art of cryptography. And that's actually gone way down. The feedback we've gotten from a lot of the universities is that some of them even have zero cryptographic folks in the cryptography. They've all moved to AI, right? And that's a problem. That's a problem. Cryptography is the Achilles heel of the whole thing. Without getting that right, you have nothing. And so it's amazing to me that they've just pushed the bar as far as they have, but understandably, the government, our government, you know, driving this, including a lot of other governments on the planet and industry 30 years ago, when we created the thing called the internet, had to have some sort of a structure in place so we can make it happen. And so that's what they created. And it was great for those purposes at that point in time. It's just that as it became more generally available, the back doors and the holes and the cracks in it, now we're at the point we are now where really the pendulum hasn't swung at all for progressing anything, but the adversaries and the bad actors, whoever, they've gotten way more sophisticated. And so they're just exploiting that more and more and more and more and more. And that's the challenge. Like we say, there's no one really within an organization today, not that it's the organization's fault, because there's not really expertise out there you can hire to bring in to do this type of stuff. And it's the thing that no one wants to talk about because they don't want to admit that they don't have good security today. Straight up. I mean, they can't admit it. I mean, and everybody knows it. I mean, it's obvious, but they still won't talk about it, you know. But that's the reality of the world we live in, including all the way up to our 3-letter agencies, is they're all stuck with in that model, right? And that's what we're going to see, you know. So when I see post-quantum coming, that model is going to shift dramatically. But PQC is only focusing on that algorithm level, where it should be looking across the whole stack and how you start to control the main issues that are occurring, which that's one layer. But we talk about the authenticity is another layer, the performance is another layer. Like all these things go hand in hand if you need something that's going to apply for everybody. And so that's the beauty of what we have. It can go everything from critical infrastructure and legacy stuff all the way to an individual sitting at home that just wants to protect the stuff they have up on their web-based storage, you know, whatever flavor they're using. And that's the reality, right? And right now, all we're saying is, you know, we think that the end user or the creator deserves the right to protect their own privacy and their own stuff.
I mean, that makes sense.
You know, I think it makes sense. And I think that changes the discussion back to personal privacy and even things like freedom of speech and a lot of other things that roll up into the things that we value holistically. And I see that coming. It's just we haven't gotten to that conversation in broad context amongst the general population yet. They're still just in shock and awe watching that movie like over Christmas that showed the people hijacking Teslas and using them as weapons, crashing into stuff or creating mayhem.
Yeah.
That's at the level we're at. Is more of the, it's the normal typical cycle. It's what's clickbait. Let's just scare people. Let's see what's going on instead of really talking about the real issues at hand and what we can do to help it. No one likes to talk about the little pushes that make us land where we want to land. They only talk about the crazy anomalies, right? That's the thing that makes you want to click on it.
That's fair. So you talked about your solution. So what is your solution? Software, hardware, some combination of both? Your website has a desktop app and a Java SDK. So what is your product?
Yep. So our product is a crypto system. It's 100% software, and it can be deployed on hardware. No problem. Ultimately, we see it being embedded right at the chip level. We have some experience doing some other things like that in the past. And we will get there as soon as the chip guys are ready to see the scale of shipping, tens of millions of chips on a quarterly basis. We will be right in that discussion. And I think it will progress quickly. The solution itself, like I say, it's really this really simple piece of software. It's delivered in an SDK. That's the primary way. And it's the Clear SDK. We have anybody can download it for free. There's like a free 30-day trial, and you can use the individual version for free forever if you want. But if you want some more of the advanced features, then there's some, you can upgrade to those if you'd like. The SDK has some documentation, but literally it's deployed in 2 lines of code. The idea is to take something extremely complicated and make it extremely easy so that people can use and deploy this. We also kept the cost point, shall we say, palatable, right? It's not going to break your bank. They don't need to go raise money over the next 3 years to afford this thing. Like literally, it's like maybe a few $1,000s to lock down your whole database, right? Or, $7 an endpoint, per month. So we're talking like a couple $100s a year for logging in. It's basically right in line with the price of like antivirus software is where we landed the cost point, because we figured it's kind of like utility, just like that. So that's where we figured the landing point from a cost perspective after our analysis made sense. And so that's where we put it into place. So we made it extremely easy to implement and deploy, cost effective, and available now, right? This is the tech that, 7 years from now, we're still thinking about it and having big talks with the rubber's meeting the road now. You can go now. You can draw the line in the sand now. In fact,
nice.
I'd make the argument for everybody that becomes aware of this and doesn't do that, they're really doing a disservice to themselves, because this changes the game, especially if you're a CISO or a CIO, and if you got hacked recently or you're worried about that, or the board's crushing you. This is an immediate thing you can deploy and immediately point to and say, look what we did. We're buttoned up now. All the way down to a level we've never been protected before. You can control all your admin access. You can control all the access all the way down to each frame of a stream, right?
We also have
the game changer. Yeah.
We also have the ISIT app. So that's the desktop application. So with tax season coming up, people are sending their tax information, all that kind of stuff to your CPA, anything like that. You can download ISIT off the ISIT.app website. And you can, we call it, you freeze the file because it looks like an ice cube when you double click on it. And you can send that, you can email that, you could use Gmail, Outlook, whatever you use. And even if that Gmail or any of that is breached, it's frozen and you're not going to be able to get into that file. So your financial records, any of that tax information is secure. And then on the other side, if you tell your CPA, hey, this is what I'm using to send it to you, go on here, you exchange the simple code, QR code, boom, you guys share your access to your keys that way, where you're sending him something specifically for him. That's where the HyperKey technology comes in. That's really useful.
And I would say, yeah, as they're doing that, like even their secure vaults, right? People call these things their secure vaults. Those aren't secure. Like, let's stop pretending. And so basically what we do is we uplift that. You can still use their secure vault. That's fine. But what you're going to be putting up there is an encrypted file. And like you said, that ice cube makes it very visual if you have the animation mode turned on, where you can physically see that it's protected, right? And you can use any of your standard programs. That's the thing. There's no rip and replace required with us. We can use Slack still, right? We can use email, as Ryan mentioned. But it's in the instance of, even in today, and you'll notice like the third-party entities that live in the middle, right? If they get breached today, your data is exposed. There's nothing you can do. Right? You get it. People get into your network lots of different ways, and all we're saying is everything that's traveling through your network should be encrypted.
Right.
All your databases down to the character level should be encrypted. Like there's really no excuse for it not to be at this point with something like Quantum Night.
Interesting. How do you convince the C-suite, right? Obviously, I think Ryan brought up the point, excellent point of like, well, now there's fines. And even if you do have ransomware insurance, I would imagine the first, like any form of insurance, as soon as you use it, they charge you even more because you used it. I mean, is it going to be, obviously government has a different yardstick for what they have to do than say the private sector. But I mean, do you think it's going to be just people are going to be scared into doing this because they see what happens to their could this be a competitive advantage basically where if you deploy this today, like you said, like well Y2Q, which is what the cool kids call the year that quantum can provably break encryption. When that happens, I mean, you can legitimately say you are as prepared as can be.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 3 general attacks, and I'll let Ryan hit this too. But obviously, you already mentioned regulatory, right? That hits the boardroom. Right. People have to be in compliance. There's mandatory compliance things around PQC and things like healthcare and other things, especially if you're government or regulated at this point, that are going to start kicking in now. And there are fines that will start to roll out. We'll see if they push them again a little bit more, but at the moment, they're supposed to be starting to get fines this year, by the end of the year, actually, on a lot of these actions for certain industries, right? Healthcare being one of them. Right. I think that then the second thing is you have insurance pressure, right? And so insurance, as you mentioned, they come in, if you get breached or you use it, your costs go up. But also just to now comply with their mandates, you have to prove things like end-to-end encryption, and people can't do that today. And so that's another thing that we address immediately, right? And then I'd say the third thing really comes down to the boardroom and how much they've been breached already, or who within their world has been breached. Like if you're a casino and saw what happened to MGM last year, what are you doing? I know Caesars also got hit at the same time. They handled it a little bit differently than MGM, so they didn't get bit quite as hard. But it cost those guys, $100 million plus each to deal with that one breach, right? I don't know of many other companies or organizations that can afford that level of a hit to your bottom line. I mean, that was over a 3-week period, right? And so that's the pressure, right? There's lots of risk and liability now sitting there. And I'd say where we found the most traction is obviously at the board level, but a lot of times the CFO's office ultimately owns the risk and exposure to the business, right? And so they seem to be very, very engaging very quickly, because I don't think they feel like they're getting answers to help them in any way. Right. And I think they just continually are getting lit up in every way possible. And they're just sort of in this reactive mindset. I don't know how many people we've been talking to over the last 2 years where we're talking to the CISO, CIO teams, and these are large Fortune, 500, Fortune 2000 companies. And we'll be talking to them for 6 months. They get breached and they're all gone. So our conversation goes from like, oh, they're about, and then all of a sudden the whole team's gone and they're starting over again. And we've seen that been a chronic issue now over and over again, because the CISO and CIO suite, especially the CISO suite, is taking this on the chin as far as being blamed for why it's this way, when end of the day, it's not their fault, right? There isn't capabilities to button up tighter today. Let's be frank about it. There's lots of, philosophies and different things that people are doing, like in little tiny pieces of aspects, but no one's looking at the end-to-end system, right? And that's where being a crypto system is very different than the algorithms or just key management or random number generation, all those types of things. Those are all one-off little pieces of it, and not that they're not important, they are also, but it really doesn't tie the whole thing together, right? And I think that's what we're doing right now, is we're really trying to tie it all together, where someone like a CFO or an operational executive or the board can see an actual real draw line in the sand improvement of getting rid of that exposure that is existing there today, because that's a painful exposure. I mean, I can't imagine, especially certain banks or other folks, kind of what's happening at the boardroom and how they're, thinking they're going. I mean, I think the Citibank, the chief COO got fined, because they missed their FCC or was the FCC? Yeah, I think it was FCC regulatory stuff, right? So I think they got fined like $300 million or something like that. I think that, and so he got canned. So, you know, these things are popping up and becoming extremely real. And, you know, a lot of the companies out there really haven't gone the full length of protecting their customers, right? That's the reality. I think there's too much money being made everywhere. And a lot of the cracks that exist make a lot of people a lot more money. And so, you know, why, you know, it's an expensive endeavor. And like I say, they have to admit that it's not good right now. So,
and they're only going to make it better and change it once the people, you know, are no longer willing to, their trust is broken, right? And that's how they fight back, by moving their business somewhere else.
Yep.
So when enough trust is broken, then a company, I mean, ideally, that's what they're not supposed to be able to come back from, right?
Yep.
So the banks should care. And exactly. It's really exciting. I mean, I've just been sitting here like, I've been really enjoyed so much just listening and learning, and what you're talking about is so vitally important. And I think that to understand that there's nobody in university in the cryptography space is alarming, but also we best be making some parents knowledgeable about that, so they can start directing their children into a field that really is going to explode.
That's what I tell my kids, like, you know, don't worry about what you want to be when you grow up. Just get really good scores at math. Just study math and public speaking and you'll be good.
Right.
I mean, that goes to everything going on with AI. Is AI's built on the input and outputs, and for mathematics that doesn't hold much water. Math is based on axioms, and understand the axioms of mathematics and building from there. So if your kids and the, you know, the next generation coming out understand and can understand mathematics that way, it puts us all in a better spot. Absolutely. Because that AI isn't there for math, and the way that it trains itself, and that isn't good for math. So
no, AI is there for the linguistic majors.
Exactly.
Right. They're the new prompt engineers, the new English and history majors that know how to research and know how to have such command of the English language. But look how we're funneling people. Are you going into AI? Are you going to go into quantum with, you know, encryption? Where there's lots of opportunity. There's opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, like, people ask me all the time, like, I want to get started in AI. Where do I start? And I was like, well, first off, this isn't 2014 anymore. Getting into AI is not it wasn't a sure bet then, but, you know, I would recommend you switch to security, because, you know, everybody needs secured, and just the nature of geopolitics, you know, the war is only as far away. The front line is only as far away as your smart device or pacemaker, I guess, as the case may be. You know, it's we live in a dangerous world. It's always been a dangerous world, but I think that's the nature of everything being so tightly connected, which has brought us so much gifts. We're about to see what the cost of that is. And I fear that days get sooner and sooner, and people are just not aware of just how serious this is. Quantum, I think, has an opportunity to, like, splash cold water in people's face before the fire comes, I think. You know, one would hope, but I also think that, you know, we take a lot of this because it's so invisible. We take a lot of this for granted.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of trust in these zero trust strategies that you have to have, right?
Right.
And most very funny.
Yeah. Very funny. it's an interesting space. My wife is in this field, so it's like, you know, I think I shared with you on the pre-call, like, hey, you know, like, I was telling her all about when ChatGPT came out, like, oh, you take all this data, you train it, you vectorize, you do all this, and then she just turned to me and said, but isn't that all the training data becomes one big attack surface? And I was like, yep. Well, yeah. And when I said that to a lot of other AI people, they looked at me like I had a tinfoil hat, you know, like the meme of, like, the guy from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Right. But now, sure enough, what's in one of the 10 OWASP principles, right? Like the source data, like, it's not. Plus, I also tend to think that these systems are so complex, have so many parameters, and they create these kind of latent spaces that we really don't know what's really in there. right?
Exactly.
And we may never really know what's really in there. It's because these are, if you think of them as machines, they're not really machines, but I mean, if you think of them in mechanical terms, there's so many hidden parts, right? This is like you open up the hood and it's not just one engine and one set of car parts. I mean, it's trillions of car parts, right? So it really begs.
I think the kids made the best point to this, right? My kids brought this up the other day, and I was really impressed because we were talking about generally AI and these things. And they're like, Dad, the challenge with AI is it rolls up, and now who controls what's feeding the AI? Is that just one person? How do we democratize? Who's deciding what data elements are feeding in the AI models, right? And I'm like, exactly. Like, I love the fact that they're thinking, I'm not sure if that's something their teacher brought up or whatever, but I love the fact that that was something that they brought up on my mind.
Who cares? If their teacher said it and it bounced around and they said it, I mean, it's an old problem, right? Who watches the watchers?
Yep.
Right. The winners write history. And
this centralizes that control like very easily. Now, certain parties can really control the narrative even to an insane level now. I mean, we think it's bad enough for just our media and other stuff spitting out, clickbait stuff everywhere, and you're not sure what to read. But I mean, this is real stuff. I mean, he who controls the narrative in these things is going to control. I mean, they're going to sway everything from even the way that systems operate, right? Without people. So
that's true. Yep. And I think it's very noble. You said it from the get-go. Like, you want to make sure you want the world to be a type of world you want your kids to live in, to have kids of their own. And like, and it sounds alarmist, but it's true. Like, we are on the cusp of building something completely new. Much in the same vein that the 110, 120 years ago, when Standard Oil was basically convincing everyone to ditch and, to run towards the internal combustion engine, right? And at one time, petroleum was considered a more, I wouldn't say they used the word ecological, but they were basically killing whales for whale oil. Mm-hmm. This was oil that wouldn't involve killing whales. You pull it out of the ground. When electricity looked like it was coming to replace gas, kind of that type of lighting, they basically had a team at like, well, what's their next use for oil? Because we have all this stuff. Internal combustion engine turned out to be the thing. And, we lived our entire lives in the shadow of that decision. And I think that we're in a very similar vein with the idea that, who controls the narrative, who controls this, that becomes a soft power that you can project. And it's so effective because you don't really notice it. And that is truly scary.
And I think the way people adopt AI too, or even on their phone, like they just take it for reality, right? Like the questioning of why it's saying that to me or where that came from, or, like we say, little nuances in a supply chain AI use case, for example, skews the whole model rapidly. So that's the challenge I think that we're seeing across sort of the AI spectrum right now, is you're seeing kind of it was really, really, really hot. Now it's kind of leveling off and people are realizing that the really, really hot, they're trying to see what's actually adding value and where it's at. And now they're going back and trying to regroup to figure out how to get to where they need to, because it's not hitting yet. Right.
And people just assume, like you said, like the AI is right. Well, not always. I mean, I don't eat a rock a day. I don't put glue on my pizza to keep the cheese on it. Right. Like, and it's only those ridiculous things that make people realize, like, wait a minute, this is, and like, I kind of come to the conclusion that AI is always hallucinating. It's just, we only call it hallucinating when it's obvious.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so I know we're getting close to time, but this has been a fascinating conversation.
Oh, yes. This has been amazing.
We'd love to have you back on the show, maybe dive deep into some other aspects and things like that. But where can people find out more about Quantum Night and kind of what you all are up to?
I'd say there's a couple areas they can go to. They can go to quantumnight.io. That's QUANTUMKNIGHT.io. That's our main webpage. On that page, right at the top links, you can get right to the SDK if you want to download the SDK, or the ISID app, which is a desktop app currently. Will be mobile and Android here soon, but that's on the next wave of development. But right now it works on all your desktops. And then, anybody can go and download those for free. We have some other information that's there. Or if anybody would like to email us, they definitely can. You can email me directly at andys@quantumnight.io. If I could talk, we'd be in good shape. But yeah, no, and feel free to reach out to us. We're really looking at people that are putting their arms, understanding this, and are passionate about getting this out and into people's lives, because this is a game changer, and we can sort of grab control back. And I think that's the beautiful moment we have, and that's what we want to do. So for people that recognize it, we'd love to speak with you. Please, download the stuff, use it. Any questions on that, let us know too. We're working with, lots of folks across the spectrum. So we're very focused proactively going after mostly the, critical infrastructure, regulated industries, things like healthcare and financial services, right? But that being said, anybody can go and download. So actually our first customers was like a law firm, right? And, or like Ryan mentioned, some of our other customers are CPAs and things that want it. So it doesn't have to be big, and it's not break the bank. I mean, for like a CPA to implement our stuff, to start, it's like $20 a month.
Right. It's on par with antivirus.
Yeah. It's like, we made it that way on purpose, right? We wanted it to lay it out where people are just going to use it and make it a no-brainer using it. And we feel that once it's out there and it's within, when people see how it is and how they're protected, that it'll be a no-brainer. And hopefully our icing it, creating those little ice cube icons, we want that to go viral. So if you guys have any good ideas on helping people want to create ice cubes, we're imagining all the kids on their little iPads, like making everything, turning them into ice cubes.
Nice.
Anything like that would be awesome. But yeah, it's really kind of how we can educate people as quickly as possible and bring them along and not complicate it so much that they just get hazy-eyed and don't even know where to begin, right? And so
even the word cryptography does scare off a lot of people. And I think security and privacy is everybody's business. And I think that, we have to take it, because everybody's so vulnerable. We have to take it from like this high priestly class into like it's an everyman problem.
Yep.
Awesome. Any parting thoughts, Candace?
I honestly, this has been 100% fascinating. I can't wait to listen to it again and then come up with a bunch of questions that I want to ask. But this was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Candace and Frank. Appreciate it a lot.
Yep, it was our pleasure. Fantastic speaking with you.
Awesome. And we look forward to having you back on the show, and we'll let Bailey, our AI, who's hopefully secured and not hallucinating, finish the show.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Impact Quantum. A huge thanks to Andy Schwaderer and Ryan from Quantum Night for breaking down the looming quantum security crisis. And more importantly, what we can do about it before the bad actors have a field day. If today's conversation didn't make you rethink your digital security, well, good luck with that. But if it did, be sure to check out Quantum Night Solutions at quantumnight.io and start locking things down before quantum computers start picking the locks. As always, if you enjoyed the show, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your fellow quantum curious friends. We'll be back soon with more mind-bending discussions at the intersection of quantum tech, AI, and cybersecurity. Until next time, stay curious and stay encrypted.